Sitting on the park bench, eyeing little girls with bad intent. Hey, Aqualung, drying in the cold sun, watching as the pretty Peggy.
Freddy Krueger is a horror icon, one of the most recognizable serial killers in film. I mean, the guy was a child molester who was burnt to death by the parents of his victims, and after death he exists in a parallel universe between the dream world and the real world, stalking children and teenagers through their dreams and killing them in the process. Now that is a cold-blooded motherfucker. Naturally, there was an NES incarnation of Nightmare on Elm Street, and naturally LJN got a hold of it. How LJN continuously acquires all these big licenses after shitting all over so many of its counterparts with a poor quality product, and still having the money to afford more licenses is beyond me. I guess people just kept buying them. So we can't possibly expect Nightmare on Elm Street to be any good, can we? Well, let's give it a shot. You control an unnamed teenager walking around Elm Street, punching out snakes and bats and zombies, all Freddy's apparent minions. You can also have 2 players if you want a buddy to join in on some co-op action. And the game actually is one of the few that lets you play 4 players if you have an adapter. The objective is to walk around every house and landmark on Elm Street, collect every one of Freddy's bones, and battle a boss to get a key to the next building, all until you finally meet up with Freddy, kill him, and destroy the bones. So it doesn't follow the story of the films very precisely, but to make this into a playable video game, they have to take some creative freedom here. So as goofy as this is, it's not a terrible premise. There are 2 settings you can find yourself in, awake or asleep. While awake, your only attack is by means of punching. If you fall asleep, the enemies take a different form and become a little more difficult to kill, but you can gain special abilities if you've picked up these specific icons. There's the acrobat that gives you a steady projectile to throw in javelins, and does somersaults while you're in midair for shits and giggles. There's the magician that hurls fireballs and can hover in air momentarily, and the ninja that has throwing stars and a jump kick attack. You have a sleep meter that drains whenever you get hit or stand still for too long, plus it drains naturally at a slow pace. You can increase your sleep meter by grabbing a hot cup of coffee that conveniently sits around in some places or mysteriously hovering in midair. You can also take about 4 hits before dying. When you die, you turn into an angel and ascend off screen. Probably the hokiest death in a horror-themed game of all time. After losing all 5 lives, you can continue and respawn right back in the same place, so it's not really any different. You get 3 continues, but once you lose all of them, you have to start over. Dying works the same way whether you're awake or asleep. The coffee that you normally find while awake is replaced with a boombox while you're asleep, and grabbing it will summon a rocking tune that wakes your ass up. After spending enough time sleeping, the Freddy Krueger song starts playing, and you know now that Freddy's on his way, and you better find a radio or get to the boss as fast as you can. When the song finishes, Freddy shows up and has a battle with you in this small area. All he does is slash once and jump every once in a while. Since you're asleep, he's not too hard as long as you have a special weapon. Because you don't have to get too close to him, you can just jump kick through him whenever he gets close. After getting enough hits on him, he'll run away and you'll continue from where you left off. But you're still asleep, so you better find a radio before you have to go back to an unnecessary battle with Freddy, losing precious health for no reason. So this creates a dilemma. Do you want to be awake with easier enemies but weaker attacks? Or do you want the weapons, slightly harder difficulty but also closer to Freddy? I like being asleep, but I find that in doing so, I'll have a tendency to rush things to beat the timer and fall down pits, losing lives just like that. So deciding whether you want to stay awake or asleep will be up to you. Also in multiplayer modes, if one person's sleep meter goes down, everyone falls asleep, so this can bring some strategy into play. If you want to stay awake, make sure the person with the lowest sleep meter grabs the coffee and it'll prolong yourself from falling asleep. The actual gameplay is pretty decent. It's standard side-scrolling with good controls, but there are issues, like how you get pushed back a half mile after you take a hit. Sometimes it knocks you down a pit or into some spikes or some other form of instant death that's generally undeserving and cheap. Also, sometimes there are bones that blend in a bit with the background, and once you get to the end, you can't go through the door and realize there's a bone or 2 you missed and have to go backtrack and search all over the screen for the bone you missed. It's like Where's Waldo, but you have to dodge a bunch of enemies at the same time. The graphics are pretty good. Nothing amazing, but there's some good creepy shit that works well for the atmosphere. Speaking of atmosphere, the soundtrack does a good job of adding to the atmosphere. It has some good tracks that change up and are generally underrated. So you'll start out on Elm Street walking around punching shit, and you realize you have to go into one of these buildings. So which one do you go in first? I can't answer that. Why? Because the first 3 houses are a fucking randomly selected sequence. The one with the closed orange doors, the one with an open orange door, and the one with an open blue door. Any of those could be the first, second, or third house you need to go into. It's always different, so you'll have to just run it by trial and error. Luckily they're the first 3 houses on the street, so you don't have to run from one end of the street all the way to the other. It'd be a pain in the ass. So in the first house, you'll need to get 12 bones in the first room. Most of them are pretty much along your path, but be sure to grab the ones on the staircases. They blend in a little bit. Be cautious when jumping off this floating platform to grab the acrobat icon. If you jump too high, you'll bump your head and fall into the pit. And don't bypass this bone down here that you have to get to by the floating platform. You're better off jumping over the spiders and punching out the flying bug things whenever they're in your way. Of course, if you're asleep, you can get trigger happy with your javelins. Once you get enough bones, slip into the basement where you'll need 10 bones. This one's much shorter and all 10 bones fall right into your lap. Just punch out the spiders that bounce on the bones and watch out for these knives that inexplicably fire out of the wall. After advancing, you'll meet the first boss, Freddy's razor glove leading a string of balls. All it does is lunge out at you at different lengths, and then retreat. You can attack the balls first, which will render them useless to hurting you before you take on the claw, but really you'd be stupid to do anything but switch to the acrobat and stand back, firing in a kneeling position. Since every boss battle takes place in the sleep mode, you don't have to worry about timing yourself to fall asleep in time for a battle to switch to a special form. You won't get hit once if you follow this strategy, making this boss extremely easy. Grab the key after winning, which will unlock the second house, whichever one the case may be. This one has 13 bones to collect, and there's more high drops, pits, and floating platforms. If you haven't gotten an acrobat icon yet, don't bother trying to slip into this gap to get it. There'll be an easier one up here. Don't forget this bone up here by the top of the window. You have to leap off this platform to reach. Toward the end of the area, there'll be spiders popping out of the pits. Wait for them to jump before you do, and the last pit has 2 spiders that aren't really in sync with each other, so you'll have to wait for both of them to jump at about the same time before you can get over them without taking a hit. You'll then head upstairs to the attic, where there'll be a dozen bones for you to find. This place is kinda compact, so there'll be a lot of instances where enemies will close in on you, especially the bats. The hardest bone to find is this one up here in the web at the corner of this beam. The boss is similar to the last one, although instead of Freddy's glove on a string of balls, it's Freddy's head on a string of balls, and he attacks by not only lunging, but also by spitting out and unleashing multiple tongues. Equip the acrobat persona again and do the same thing you did with the glove, only this time change your position once in a while to take out the tongues that bounce around. He's not very hard either, you should be able to make pretty short work of him. The third house has a bone that's settled up here at the top of the window. Grab it right away. Then slip down here to get this bone, but you not only have to contend with the tight squeeze, but you also have to fend off these fucking bugs that won't go away. As you get to the end, be sure to grab the Shadow Warrior icon before advancing to the attic. There are 13 bones here, and there are also bats that drop rocks from above. At the end of the room, there'll be a rat on this platform and knives firing out of the wall below. Drop down and duck quickly to get the bone by the knives, then time your jump so you land just to the side of the rat and duck and punch him quickly to get the other one. Then head back to the trapdoor to the basement. This one's very short and sweet, only 4 bones to grab and they're all easy. The only thing you have to watch out for are the droplets that drip from the ceiling. Wait for them to fall before squeezing your way between them. The boss is another form of Freddy's glove, only this one doesn't have balls. You'll fly around in a pattern similar to one of those screensavers with the block floating around the screen. You'll want to be the ninja for this one, attacking it with jump kicks whenever it gets close. It gets progressively faster, so try to keep up with it and keep your distance to make your timing easier when you attack. After taking it down, walk all the way to the end of Elm Street to the junkyard.